In video 64, I showed how you could use a pretty simple VBA macro to record how long it takes to update your Power Query. I tried to figure out how to record how long your query takes within Power Query, and I've had a lot of failures. This video doesn't give you a good solution. In fact, I don't trust it at all. Instead of working through the steps live, I'll instead walk you through them, what I tried to do, and why it doesn't really work, or at least I don't trust it. To begin with, I created a table where I simply had a column, which is a column I'll find in the next steps when I load my actual data, where I'd want to take the time. My idea was that if I take the time at the start, then this will become fixed, that is immutable, and it won't change later on. The problem here is that that's not how steps work in Power Query. This first step isn't actually evaluated as the first step. When I go into Advanced Editor, the way the steps work is that you look at what is the last step, time stop, skip first to this step, and then it will work through all of the individual steps. What step does this refer to? What step does the other step refer to? And so on. Which means that the first step isn't necessarily chronologically the first step. My idea was that if I do a timestamp like this, where I physically print the time in a row, and I then add that to my actual table, then this will become fixed, because this then forces this first step to actually chronologically be the first step. I load up an Excel file here, expand it like normally, change type. Then I do a table combine step where I combine the time start step with this table, meaning I now have my stamp within the table. Again, my hope was that by physically stamping this table time start within my actual table, that this would then become immutable. So it would actually be the time at the start. Then I just do some steps that would take some time, because I actually need some time to pass in order to calculate the difference. So here I just do a grouping, and then I do table repeat, where I repeat this table 200 times. Again, don't really worry about it, it's just to have something happening. As you can see from my comments here, I try some different things, where I wanted to delete the first 4 rows just to see if I could get something to work. Yeah, because again, this is an inactive step. I don't refer to it because it didn't work. Lastly, I repeat the process of adding a new row where I take the time. This is the exact same code as in the first step, except this is now the time stop. And again, my idea was that I would physically print the stop time inside the table so that they would become immutable. That didn't work, but it was an idea. I try adding Table.Buffer because that would then force the table to be loaded inside my memory, which again I hoped would make it immutable because of the way tables and lists work in Power Query. They are actually a reference to the code that gives you the table, if that makes any sense. There's this guy called Webb who talks about this. So I tried some stuff and it didn't work. Here I wanted to store this information in the meta step because I don't actually want the time to be stored within my table. I want that to be stored in another query, where I then convert the time into text because DAX was being stupid and it gave me a bad format. It says it should take 0 minutes and 0.023 seconds, and if I try updating it, we can see what it will give me now. You can see that this takes more than 0.02 seconds. So I don't trust this at all. I tried doing this in a work query where it said it took half a second to update, which I know for a fact is wrong, because when I press refresh and I see the tables being loaded, it took at least 5 seconds, but my query says it takes half a second. But there's one last thing I can do, which is something that Webb found. He has this original blog post where he talks about some things. Yeah, here he explains this lazy evaluation and immutability, which is what I thought would work. Yeah, in this other post, he references this original post, and here he mentions this invoke after function, which is just a function that will take a certain amount of time in case you need to wait. Here he offers another solution, which is to use the DateTime.FixedLocalNow function. And the way the FixedLocalNow function works is instead of taking the time when you call the function, it instead takes the time at the start of the query, which means that DateTime.FixedLocalNow should never be able to change. It's supposed to take the time when you start updating, and then you can use DateTime.LocalNow at the end, like what I do in the query, where here in the time start step, instead of using DateTime.LocalNow, I should use the FixedLocalNow and ask what the helper text is for the function. It returns a date time set to the current date and time. The value is fixed, cannot change with successive calls. Yeah, which means that the normal DateTime.LocalNow can give you multiple different values depending on when it's called. but FixedLocalNow is supposed to take the time at the start of the query, which is why if I change this first step, time start, to FixedLocalNow, it should actually be the FixedLocalNow that is the original time when I hit update. Then in this row, it's supposed to be the time difference. So if I try updating everything, this should hopefully give a different number. And you can see how long it takes to update. So it does actually take multiple seconds. And yet here it says that's days, hours, minutes, seconds, and it still says 0.04 seconds, which is very clearly not correct. If we now try refreshing it, it still says it takes 0.05 seconds, which is very obviously wrong. And like I mentioned before, in my work scenario, when I tried doing this FixedLocalNow, it said it took half a second when I know for a fact that this box here was open for at least 5 seconds. I don't trust it remotely. You could then ask the question if you even need to know how long it takes to update. At least for your user, you internally might want to know if a query is slow, and then you can make some changes and see if it's faster. But honestly, I would trust a stopwatch more than I trust these functions. So that was a bit of a failure, but I felt it was necessary to include that. So yep,